Hey, hi. How are you? Welcome to Basketball by Association. I am Joel Cordes. Archie Shea has the week off, presumably on some sort of cartography mission deep in the Amazon. That's what I was last told. We're joined instead by a good friend of the show, Matt Dagostino from NBA TV, Turner Sports, all sorts of different places you can find Matt. Matt, it is awesome to have you back. We're going to be talking NBA Southeast Division as we preview the NBA season here.
Yes, Archie's loss is my gain today. I appreciate that. Well, here I wait with bated breath as to the results of his expedition. But in the meantime, basketball it is.
He will join us again at some point, but it does mean we get to talk 97% less Knicks on the show, which is a win for everyone because he finds a way to weasel them in no matter the preview series, no matter who we're actually supposed to be talking about. Like I said, Southeast Division preview, you can check out on YouTube the video versions of the other divisions that we've done so far, the Southwest, the Atlantic, the Northwest, and the Central. We've got the Pacific still coming up yet. If you want the audio-only versions, Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts, of course, give us the like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff as well. And it wouldn't be a Basketball by Association if we didn't name the episode. This is version 121, and this is a really easy selection, but an interesting one because there's only one player in NBA history who has logged 121 NBA career playoff games. And he is a unique case in that this is a guy who logged a career of 16 seasons in the NBA. He is a one-time All-Star. He was on the 89-90 rookie team. He never at any point in his career averaged more than 16 points per game. That was the high water mark. And yet, this guy is a Hall of Famer. Came in during the 89-90 season, played
racking the brain for that draft class as we speak.
7 seasons with the Los Angeles Lakers. Did a couple of tours in Charlotte with the Hornets, who, of course, we'll talk about today on the division preview. And then became very, very well known, including getting his one All-Star with the Sacramento Kings before ending his career with the Lakers one more time. I'll give you a guess now, Matt, but when I give you the other clue, you'll know exactly who this is.
At first get this sounds like Vlade Divac, but I could be incorrect.
It is Vlade Divac. Right. Congratulations. Yeah. The other clue was once traded for Kobe Bryant. That would have
been the giveaway. I was doing the math though, knowing that Kobe was drafted in 96 and you said 7 seasons with the Lakers. So I figured I'd shoot my shot.
All right. You got it. So Vlade, we're going to do you proud. Of course, the high starring role on one of the most entertaining teams of all time with the Sacramento Kings, Chris Webber, Jason Williams, Mike Bibby there for a little bit, Peja Stojakovic, all those guys we could name drop. Just a hugely fun time in the NBA and one of the precursors to modern NBA offenses all the way. And Rick Adelman, I've always been a huge stan of his too. I loved his team. So,
and many think robbed of a chance at a championship many moons ago.
Count me among those people who had a hard time liking the Shaq and Kobe Lakers anyway, and rooted hard for the Sacramento Kings, rooted hard for the Portland Trail Blazers. I felt they got robbed of their shot too. But nonetheless, we go to the Southeast Division and we start at the top, a team that has been to the NBA Finals in the last couple of years, team that did not get there all the way last year, but did win the NBA Eastern Conference with a whopping 53 wins. Yeah, it was that kind of year in the East, but no disrespect to them whatsoever, because as soon as you do that, they punch you in the mouth. It's the Miami Heat, and an off season that on the one hand doesn't look like it was active enough. There weren't a lot of huge moves as far as like influx of players coming in, Matty, or draft picks. You do get the Tyler Hero extension, but I feel like that's kind of par for the course with Miami, where they make a large move every couple of years that really is a sea change there. You think back to Jimmy Butler coming aboard, and obviously, Kyle Lowry was a much lesser get, but a guy that still was a needle mover. And then they go through a couple of seasons with that group, and they just kind of tinker and add some things along the side. They're kicking the tires on Victor Oladipo still. And it really doesn't matter because we can look at their roster and go, they're not deep enough. They don't have enough top-end talent. They're not enough. And yet, as the Miami Heat like to always say, we have enough. We have enough. That's a big Eric Spoelstra thing. And I don't know, your thoughts, what you have liked about this off season for them. I've got one in the tank, but it's easy to disrespect the Heat too often, and then we all pay for it, right?
We know the pedigree that they have. We know the atmosphere and the culture that they brought to their organization. That's no secret. But you said you have one positive that you take from the Miami offseason. That may be one more than I have, to be completely honest with
you. All
right. Disappointment is the word of the offseason for the Miami Heat, in my perspective. They are a team. Pat Riley is a guy who prides himself, and this organization prides itself on being able to go get that guy when they want to, when they need to. And they were not able to do that this year. They couldn't do it with Kevin Durant. They couldn't do it with Donovan Mitchell.
Right.
And the loss of PJ Tucker, while he is a role player, he is a star in his role, I think will be sorely, sorely missed at this point. I want to pick your brain a little bit as you kind of look at the lineup construction, because the big talk is that Duncan Robinson, who was exiled to the end of the bench in the playoffs this year, is your starting power forward. In terms of, he can't play down on the block with anyone who's going to be power forward material. And this guy couldn't get any minutes at the end of last season anyway. Yeah. And now you're putting him into a starting role. It's an odd fit. The Tyler Hero thing, I'm fine with that. A lot of people thought it was a lot of money. I think in terms of the going rate these days for NBA players, I think it was kind of right in that window of what the salary should be. But I'm one who thinks Tyler Hero should be moving into the starting lineup as opposed to being a sixth man. If you've got Max Strus and Duncan Robinson in your starting lineup, to me, Tyler Hero is a better fit for that starting five for Eric Spoelstra.
I agree. I think touching on Hero, a lot will depend on Victor Oladipo's health and his availability game to game, because if he is back, and maybe not all-star Victor Oladipo, I don't know if we'll ever see that guy again. I really hope we do, but just a dependable scorer who can play some defense as well. Oladipo might be able to slide into that six-man role, which allows Hero to then be the starter, which seems to make a lot of sense. Hero's real value, though, is that sixth man, is that he kind of was the wild card guy, and every team needs that one wild card who can, at least one, who can go off script, make something happen for others and for himself, manufacture offense at times. And you're right, he's going to earn his money this year, or we're going to get into disappointment territory real quick, because there's a lot riding on Tyler Hero. And the other guy who's my positive for the offseason is that Gabe Vincent was not moved in any of these deals. I want as much Gabe Vincent as possible. I might even want Gabe Vincent and Tyler Hero in the starting lineup now instead of Lowry, but I understand giving Lowry the nod as the veteran. He still is productive as a defender. He still can get downhill. Shooting wasn't awful, but I think it's got to be starter in name only at this point. Vincent was the more productive player. I know Lowry's on-off numbers are usually pretty good. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, but I guess I'm just a huge Gabe Vincent guy, and maybe that to my own fault.
To me, we went from talking at the beginning of the offseason with the Miami Heat with Kevin Durant, Donovan Mitchell, and stars. And you and I are having a conversation right now about Max Strus, Duncan Robinson, and Gabe Vincent. I don't think that's the way they planned this offseason would end up going. And the size, I know they've got Yurtsevin down there who can, was very productive when he was given minutes, and maybe he's going to get more of those this season. But other than Bam Adebayo, they really don't have a physical presence down low. And that worries me in an off season where the East got a lot better. A lot of teams got a lot better. I think Miami is kind of sliding down to the second half of that playoff outlook on the Eastern Conference right now.
When you talk about Duncan Robinson at power forward, now we can get into the things we don't like, I guess. And I would be right there with you. Duncan Robinson is not a power forward. That might just be some name trickery that they're doing here, because putting Duncan Robinson in that lineup and saying you're the power forward is really saying Jimmy Butler, you're the power forward, something that he doesn't want to do, but they don't have to say he's doing it as small forward. And I would rather have Max Strus at power forward, even though he's not a guy that can play down low. At least he's a little bit thicker, a little bit bigger build. Duncan Robinson can't guard point guards on the block. I mean, he's been targeted defensively, which is part of why, beyond the streakiness, that he's played himself off the floor too many times with Miami over the last season and a half or so. He really came in, did extremely well when the scouting report was not dialed into him. And once it kind of caught up, and people started to go at him defensively as much as possible, Duncan Robinson to me looks like a really streaky Danny Green without the defensive ability that Danny Green brings. So as a specialist, a guy that you're going to get, bring in and, to use a baseball term, give a few pitches and see how he's doing and see what he can give you, absolutely. You want those weapons. But starting power forward, starter, no. Rotation player at this point, yes. Duncan Robinson was a guy that I thought Miami probably should have traded this offseason. I know the value might have been a little bit low, but some young rebuilding team like Houston, may have had somebody like Eric Gordon sitting around, or, just a different veteran that could have come into Miami and given you a little bit of a broader palette of things to choose from. But Max Strus, Jimmy Butler, Caleb Martin, I would even be 100% fine if the Miami Heat get on board with the newest trend in the NBA, which is going big, and put Bam at the 4 and Yurtseven at the 5 and see what happens there. Dwayne Dedmon at least gives you some minutes. And you're not going to play Yurtseven and Bam together for all that much, but you can at least stagger things. I think there's some flexibility there, but this idea of them going 4 out, 1 in, we'll see how passable that is with the depth that they have or don't have.
Well, and the advantage to that is it's matchup dependent, whether you want to go Twin Towers. Obviously, Minnesota is going to try that now. Boston was successful with Robert Williams and Al Horford in the lineup together last season. So it's a possibility. And the good thing is Bam is kind of a point forward, point center, to where he's very comfortable on the perimeter. That way, if you want to put a big guy down low, he can still be out and you can kind of get that movement. And listen, one caveat here with Miami Heat. They are still in position, should something become available during the season, to make a major trade. You've got the salaries to match now. Hero has got salary. Robinson has got plenty of salary. They've got the salaries where they can still do that and make a move to improve themselves. So they're certainly capable of doing that at some point during the season. But if we're looking at where they are today, I think they are one of the teams in the Eastern Conference that has slipped down the standings.
He doesn't do it often, but Archie Shea made an excellent analogy that I continue to steal when it was about the Miami Heat. And he said he really views them as a latter-day New England Patriots, not the loaded New England Patriots that were overly talented, but the ones that just really were built to wait until you made a mistake and then capitalize off that by their own lack of mistakes. And in certain years, including last year, where the Sixers didn't play up to, expectation, the Nets didn't play up to expectation, the Bucks kind of were in a championship hangover for a little bit. Miami was poised to take advantage of that through the year, but still, at the end of the day, 53 wins to win the conference tells you something was up in the East. A lot of teams canceling each other out or not performing the whole way. Boston did their thing, but they were dead in the water halfway through the season before they went on that run. So Miami took advantage of it, but there are plenty of other years where you just run into teams that are more talented, that are locked in, that have that chemistry going, and the Heat cannot compete. And from what I'm hearing from you looking around at the East, is this one of those years where Miami just might be outclassed too many times per night because these other powerhouses are getting their houses in order?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement, at least at this point. You just look at the other teams in the Eastern Conference, Boston, Milwaukee, Philly. I think I'm more optimistic about them than I am Miami at this point, and a lot of that has to do with PJ Tucker switching jerseys from Miami to Philly. I think Philly did a great job of getting some role players that are very like the Miami role players that you see. D'Anthony Melton's a great move for them. PJ Tucker, those kinds of guys, Montrezl Harrell, those kinds of role players that provide the depth that Miami usually is capable of providing, that they may be a little less capable of doing this season. So, yeah, I do think I'm more optimistic on, a handful of teams than I am Miami at this point.
But then the big question, and we'll preview the whole division standings. We'll do our predictions at the end. The big question for you, though, Maddie, are they good enough to win the Southeast again? Or are you seeing the Heat maybe slipping into second, maybe even third? Is this one of those sea change seasons where Pat Riley's got to go back to the drawing board?
Good enough? Yes. Will they do it? I'm not sure. We're going to talk about the Atlanta Hawks at some point, and I think they will have something to say about the division crown before all is said and done.
Matt D'Agostino from NBA TV, Turner Sports, TNT, NBA.com, all sorts of places joining us here on Basketball by Association. If you want the video version, you can find us on YouTube. Like, share, subscribe over there. If you want audio only, Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. And yeah, speaking of those Atlanta Hawks, let's get them. Next, they finished 8th in the East. Last year, 10 full games back of Miami with 43 wins for Atlanta. And had it been 2 years ago, we would have been just fine with the way Atlanta finished in 8th, 43 wins. That would have been okay. But it wasn't 2 years ago. It was last year. And the expectations for those Atlanta Hawks after a very strong showing a couple of playoffs ago, they were much higher than that. In fact, Archie and I had them as a potential top 3 finisher in the Eastern Conference. We were really all aboard the Hawks bandwagon, and they kicked us off the bus, and then they backed the bus over us and ran it over us again. And I can't think of a more disappointing team last year than Atlanta, and one that had more alarm bells around it after the Nate McMillan extension, the John Collins extension. A lot of people felt like, all right, they really, really disappointed last year, so they're going to blow things up. They're going to ship guys out. They didn't really do that. They retooled and maybe got the heist of the offseason in trading for DeJounte Murray. Let's talk about what you like before we get to what you don't like, because the Hawks are essentially running it back with a new all-star guard in tow. That's not bad for a team that we thought was getting the detonators out.
Yeah, I mean, and you can still sit here and wonder, is this the final version that we will see come springtime for the Atlanta Hawks, or are there still more moves in the works? Certainly John Collins' name was thrown around all over the place this summer. Clint Capella has been on and off in terms of trade rumors. But if I'm talking about things that I like with the Atlanta Hawks, DeJounte Murray's at the top of the list as far as what they did this offseason. They did consolidate some things. They did take a couple of their role players and turn it into a star, or at least a budding star. I think he is going to be able to spread his wings a little bit. No Hawks pun intended at all on that one, but this backcourt has got me super excited. I don't know exactly how it's going to work yet. In seeing them talk on media day, I don't think they know exactly how it's going to work yet. There was a large range of adjectives to describe it, from super exciting to we saw them say maybe a bit clunky in the beginning until they kind of find out where to go. But Trae Young doesn't bother me at all as an off guard with DeJounte Murray handling the ball, and vice versa. Trae's going to have the ball in his hands plenty, but I think getting them another star, which is what this league seems to be all about all the time. Not only did they get a good star, they got one that I think fits pretty well. And so you add it to DeAndre Hunter, who, if he stays healthy, I think we'll start to see things click for him. And you've still got John Collins. You've still got Clint Capella. You've got some pieces off the bench that are pretty good for Atlanta still, even though they lost, Kevin Huerter and those kinds of guys.
Yeah. Gallinari's gone.
Gallinari's gone as well. Yeah. But you bring in, even a guy, AJ Griffin, a draft pick this year from Duke, who was one of the best 3-point shooters in the country as a freshman. I think that provides a nice little spark. You've still got Bogdanovich off the bench.
Kongwu has shown a lot.
Kongwu has got a lot of defensive potential, and his offense can come around too. I think they have some good pieces, but I thought they had some good pieces last year too. So I don't know exactly what to make of it, but I know 95 times out of 100, a team with DeJounte Murray is going to be better than a team without him.
Absolutely. And I think last year proved, especially when they got into the playoffs and they ran into Miami, and Miami did the whole mouth punch thing. I mean, quite literally against Atlanta. They were so outclassed physically, and you just saw their youth. You saw all of the cracks start to show, the dysfunction that had been there through the year. it just came out in spades. And again, Miami's one of those teams built to expose that, built to exploit that, and they did it. Trae Young needed a defensive guard. He needed toughness alongside of him in the backcourt. He did not need a fellow scorer, even though that idea sounded so good. Herter and Bogdanovich just kind of proved that they were not the guy in those crunch time minutes. And Trae Young could not be the only guy who was creating offense for everybody else. And that's what I love about Murray, is that you got your lead defender, and it bumps DeAndre Hunter, I think, to your second best defender, which is perfect for him, because I think the potential to be your lead guy is there, but you're going to soften that learning curve just another year or two for him. And then, as you said, Murray's ability to handle the ball, to create, he's not the scorer that Young is. He's not the shooter that Young is, but he still has had a couple seasons under his belt in San Antonio where he had to be the guy. He had defenses teeing off on him. He had to keep everybody fed and get his own, and he did that relatively effectively. And now to not have to be that every single possession, but only certain times, and to have a much better set of weapons than he had in San Antonio, I see this as a less is more type of scenario where we may see far better numbers out of Murray, even though his usage probably goes down quite a bit from what we saw with the Spurs, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way this roster has been constructed, it's not a perfect roster, but it's pretty darn good. I think the eyes are going to be on Nate McMillan to see what he can do to fix last year and incorporate Murray into this system and get the best out of these guys. Because on talent, these guys are one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. And they didn't play like it last year at all.
Right.
But they should be one of the better teams this season.
They're 9 deep easily. As I look at the roster, the major question mark, I think, comes on that front line where you've got Collins, you've got Clint Capella and Onyeka Okongwu. Who's that fourth guy in the rotation? Is it DeAndre Hunter playing small ball and you get more Justin Holiday minutes and Bogdanovich at the small forward? I think that's probably the answer. I've got a little bit of question about whether Bogey's going to like going back to sixth man. That was something he chafed at quite a bit in Sacramento. It's one of the reasons why supposedly the Kings had to move on from him, because Bogdanovich and Hield, neither of them wanted to be sixth man. Going back now with that bigger role and starter minutes off the bench, can he thrive there? Do the Hawks maybe move him into the starting lineup and they go small ball with Bogdanovich and Hunter? That probably only happens if John Collins is moved. That front line, though, feels like they need that fourth guy. Is it going to be Jalen Johnson? Are we going to get, a Frank Kaminsky resurrection here? Ideally, it'd be a stretchy player. Maybe that's AJ Griffin, as you spoke about. Maybe that's him playing some stretchy minutes. It's not a huge problem for me as I look at the roster. There's no glaring weakness. If we're talking about a backup big as on paper your biggest issue, you're probably in pretty decent shape. And you mentioned this already, though. There still is that nagging question about chemistry. And are we in agreement that that's probably the biggest dislike for this team, is that we don't know whether Trae Young and John Collins actually can get along on the court, off the court, all of that other stuff, whether that's your true 1-2 punch, although now it's more like your 1-3 punch now that Murray's aboard.
Correct. And maybe that sorts some things out now that there's another guy in the mix of Murray's caliber, to where the pieces maybe fit a little bit better. But yeah, I mean, chemistry has got to be in question going into this season. There's no way you play the way you did 2 seasons ago and then come back and run it back last year the way you did without some sort of off-court, between the ears kind of questions on the roster. So I think it'll be very interesting. Nate McMillan, I think, has got a lot on his shoulders. But I also think it's better for the Hawks that Trae Young has less on his shoulders now. Like the fact that Murray plays defense the way he does. I mean, if it wasn't for the chemistry issues, the second nagging problem for the Hawks is Trae Young can't guard anybody. Right. So now that you kind of can hide him in a corner somewhere on the defensive end of things, I think helps a lot of the problems that they had last season on the court.
Yeah, you've got 4 strong or better defenders on the court at this point around Trae Young in that starting lineup, which is huge. We already kind of alluded to the fact that, we think Atlanta's going to be in the mix for the division. We'll get to them in our predictions as we sort things out at the end. Won't harp on that too much more, but let's go to the next team down the list, 10th in the East, the Charlotte Hornets. And again, 2 seasons ago to finish 10th, be in the play-in tournament with their rebuild and a lot of young guys on the come up, that's not as big of a deal. To finish that way last year, to get bounced in the playoffs early or the play-in like they did, Charlotte Hornets have got some major questions. And then you've got a major star not in the lineup and not, either moved in free agency in a sign-in trade or moved at all. We'll get to that in a moment, but new coach is the old coach. It's Steve Clifford back in Charlotte. Not a lot of incoming players and changes for this Hornets team. At the same time, though, when Arky Shea and I previewed them last year, we said we love the top 6 guys on this Hornet team, the starting lineup and whoever their 6th man is. It was the same way we felt about Chicago. We said, heaven help them if they get hurt, because the depth is just scary bad. And that was borne out last year quite a bit. Guys who are too young or not ready or both kind of being put into bigger roles at different times for the Hornets because Gordon Hayward hurt again for long stretches. Other guys were down. I look at the Hornets and, again, we'll get to the big absence in a minute. I'm slightly less worried about the depth overall this year because at least the young guys who were being asked to do too much last year are a year older, and there's a couple more of them to choose from. Let's get to the positives for the Hornets here. What do you like about them?
LaMelo Ball.
Thank you.
Hard not to like that guy. He is great. He is a superstar in the making. I think they were super fortunate to be able to get him in the draft. You think back now, and if LaMelo's on the Warriors, if they take him at number 2 instead of James Wiseman, it's scary to think of what they could be as a team there. But LaMelo Ball is kind of, for me, where it starts and where it ends for the most part. You talk about it's scary to think if they get injured. For me, it's more when Gordon Hayward gets injured than it is if he gets injured, which is the tough part. There was talk over the offseason about sending him to the Pacers to have him go to his home state in exchange for Miles Turner, and maybe it was Buddy Hield and maybe some other guys were involved. I thought that was something that would have benefited them. You mentioned the depth last year, to get a 2-for-1 or something like that for a guy who will play maybe 50 some odd games for you in a season. I thought it was time to move past Gordon Hayward and try something a little different. But yeah, I mean, individually, there's names in there. There's Hayward, there's Terry Rozier. There's guys in there. I like the Mark Williams draft pick out of Duke. I think he'll be something in a couple of years, and they had sorely lacked big men on that team. I'm not crazy about the depth, and Steve Clifford seems like a good coach, but haven't we been there with this? I mean, like the roster is not too different, or the potential is not too different from when Steve Clifford was here the last time in Charlotte.
Yeah, with Kemba Walker and,
correct. And he's a defensive-minded coach. I don't think we're going to see LaMelo Ball really concentrate on that side of the floor for at least a couple more years. Maybe Steve Clifford is the guy to kick him into gear on that end, but it seemed like an ill fit when you're centering this team around LaMelo, and that's going to be breakneck pace, and you're going to have to live with some of the turnovers or the attempts to make a bigger play than is needed from LaMelo. There is some of that in his game, but it just seemed like an odd timing for Clifford to come back. To me, the Hornets are the prototypical NBA team in purgatory, which is, for me, the last place I want to be as a team. I either want to be up at the top or I want to be down at the bottom and rebuilding. And they keep going into that play-in scenario, that kind of level where you're not really going to get anything. They get, a middle first round pick as a result. They don't get a chance to get a difference maker, and they're not good enough to really take a big jump in the Eastern Conference this season. To me, it's a helpless feeling to be a Charlotte Hornets fan in terms of what the prospects are for this year and maybe even a couple of years down the road until they can find some help with LaMelo Ball.
obviously the Charlotte Hornets could not have predicted, nor would they have wanted to, the offseason issues with Miles Bridges. He is out of the league right now, dealing with domestic violence. A trial for that. We won't get into too much of the legalities, and it's all alleged at this point still, but it's been big enough that he's not back in the NBA at this point, and we don't know what the future looks like. They could not have predicted that. And I guess my first question to you, how different would your outlook be on this team and that overall assessment of good but not great and certainly not good enough? Would that change at all with Miles Bridges, a guy who was tracking towards multi-time all-star in the Eastern Conference type of territory? How would that have changed things?
Yeah, I mean, it has to change things. He was a guy who turned into a 20-point scorer last year consistently. He's a high flyer. He fits in perfectly with what LaMelo Ball wants to do.
You said it.
And I thought, not gracefully, but I said it eventually. He fits exactly what LaMelo wants to do offensively with the basketball. And I think if Bridges is still on this team, he's kind of a third best player on a good playoff team. And then it's a matter of, okay, where can we find a number 2 guy to fit in? Or, what pieces can we fit in around these 2 guys? But when it's just LaMelo, in terms of basketball, I think the team is far different without Miles Bridges on the floor.
LaMelo is certainly a guy who needs those finishers, and Miles Bridges was among the best high-flying power type of finishers last year and was able to create some offense on his own, like you said, too. And, the fact that we're going to see a lot more PJ Washington and Jalen McDaniels, I'm all here for that. I like both of those players a lot. That Jalen McDaniels, that much like his brother Jaden in Minnesota, there's just a whole lot to be intrigued with. The wingspan, the skill set that those guys bring. But there are some other worrying signs besides Bridges not being on the roster. And you touched on one of them, and we'll get into the stuff we don't like now. I hate Steve Clifford coming back as coach. This is a guy that had his shot. It was a prolonged shot in Charlotte with a point guard heavy team in Kemba Walker. LaMelo Ball is, I think, arguably going to be the better player career-wise and might be the better player awfully quick, even over peak Kemba. But Clifford was, like you said, a defensive first coach, and he was a guy that seemed to like to run plays and have that discipline type of offense, which has kind of been out of vogue in the NBA for quite a long time. I mean, beginning to date back all the way to those Sacramento Kings teams in 7 seconds or less. We've started to see what free flowing can do. And for the last 15 years, that's been, I think, reinforced time and time again, that the coaches that want to sit there and call plays all the time usually run the worst offenses in the league. And so to have that guy be in charge, unless he's going to have a major late career, renaissance in his philosophy over LaMelo Ball, sure, is he going to teach him some fundamentals, and are they maybe going to be slightly better defensively, scheme-wise? Theoretically, but here's the big worrying point for me, and the one that says we're not going to get the Steve Clifford that we think that they need, because that Steve Clifford probably doesn't exist. The fact that Mason Plumlee right now is penciled in as the starter, when you have Mark Williams, you have Nick Richards, you have PJ Washington, to me says it all. If we're going with one of those coaches, Tom Thibodeau style, there you go, Archie, there's your Knicks reference. Tom Thibodeau style, that needs to give his veterans as many minutes as possible because they're going to run it the right way, Dagnabbit. You're on the wrong Charlotte Hornets team. This is not the time for that.
To me, LaMelo Ball is, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but he is kind of the poster child for this new generation of basketball. It is run and gun. It is, I may average 4 or 5 turnovers a game, but we're going to get highlights. I'm going to be good. I may take a lot of shots, but it's going to be that kind of game. And he will be a superstar. There's no doubt in my mind LaMelo Ball will be a superstar.
And it's hard to guard because it's unpredictable,
yes,
right? It's free flowing.
So.
That's what makes it effective.
Yeah, and to his credit, LaMelo has said he loves Clifford so far. He does. He did say he's a guy who's going to tell it to you straight, and he respected that. And I believe him. it just seems like an odd fit. You're absolutely right. It seems like the Hornets are trying to go back to a time 10 years ago that really isn't a part of the NBA anymore. And Clifford was a good coach for what he was able to do at the time, but it wasn't like a guy that, I don't think a lot of teams were lining up to be like, we need to go get that guy. He needs his second chance. I just he was a nice coach. He did some good things, but I think the ceiling is kind of low for this Hornets team this season.
And he had a second chance in Orlando. That's where I come back to it too. Like there's so many good young assistant coaches waiting in the wings to get their shot on a young team like this. Give one of those coaches their shot and let them connect with the players, let them do something and continue to innovate. Do not keep going back to retreads. And it felt absolutely like a Michael Jordan organization type of move, because the Hornets have done this where they're just content enough to be safe. And here we are. I based on what we had talked about with Miami and Atlanta, I don't think either of us are picking Charlotte to win the division. But I guess the question with the Hornets, do you see them finishing worse than third this year? Is that on the table?
It's definitely on the table. I think Washington has improved a little bit. I think Orlando, who we touched on last time, even though we were talking about a Western Conference division, I really like the pieces. Now, there's a lot of work to do in Orlando, but I like the pieces that they're assembling. It's just a matter of when it will all kind of click and what they can turn some of those pieces into down the road. It may not be this year for Orlando, but they are definitely on the rise. I could see Charlotte finishing last in this division, if I'm being honest.
Wow.
I think realistically they're fourth, but I could see them finishing fifth, depending on what kind of impact Paolo Banchero has for the Magic.
Matt Dagostino joining me on Basketball by Association. We're previewing the Southeast Division. You can check out all of the other division preview series on our YouTube channel. Like, share, subscribe over there. You can get the audio-only version, Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes. We still do have the Pacific Division preview coming up this next week as well. So we touched on the Wizards. Let's get to them. They finished fourth last year, 35 wins. You talk about teams in purgatory. It seems like the Wizards have been in that place for quite some time, and a team that for the last, 3 off seasons or so, 3 trade deadlines or so, we keep wondering whether it's Bradley Beal's time to be done in the nation's capital and to get moved. A team that has some talent, there's no denying that, but it hasn't been enough to get over the hump, even to be a consistent playoff appearance. They didn't do that. Bradley Beal is there, and it looks like long-term, and there is something to be said for loyalty and being with that organization the whole time. Damian Lillard is kind of making those same decisions, it seems like, with Portland. We'll see if that plays out, and we'll see if Beal is able to finish his career. There's a certain honor in that for sure. At the same time, it sounds like you're a lot higher on the Wizards than I am this offseason. I'm interested to hear why.
Maybe so. I do agree. They are another team in purgatory. The full rebuild move would have been to move Bradley Beal by now. It hasn't happened. I do give them credit for trying Russell Westbrook. Now they're trying Kristaps Porzingis. They are being active to try to improve that roster. And point. I think there are good pieces there. Porzingis, again, we can say this about how many guys, but if he stays healthy for a full season, he brings a dynamic that really, all the talk about Victor Wembanyama this week, ideally, Porzingis, in terms of the skill set, I'm not comparing him to Wembanyama, but that's the guy in the league right now who can do some of those things. Porzingis is 7'3". He's fluid. He can score. He can shoot. He can handle. He can play defense when he wants to, and Bradley Beal has said he thinks that's a very underrated part of Porzingis' game right now. And they have some other pieces there. They have got Monty Morris this offseason, who's a serviceable guy. They had Spencer Dinwiddie in the past. Like, they are not afraid to change things up. I think the hardest thing for them will be to figure out which of their young players, whether it's Rui Hachimura, Denny Avdija, who else? Corey Kispert they've got.
Kyle Kuzma.
Kyle Kuzma's a guy I like. And I think he'll probably take another step forward. I think he was a 15 or 16 point scorer last year. I think he can be in that 18 range come this season. And they got the rookie out of Wisconsin, Johnny Davis, this year, I believe, right?
Yep.
So they've got some of those guys who are all nice players, but can they develop one or two of those guys to become more than that, to help out Beal, to help out Porzingis? I think it's a very deep team in Washington. It may not be high-end talent, but it's all productive players. I don't know, not looking at the roster right now, they go 9, 10, 11 deep maybe in terms of capable guys who could be in the rotation.
We didn't mention Daniel Gafford, who has shown some flashes for a couple of seasons. There's a lot of people, including myself, who are always saying, give that guy some more minutes, because every time he's on the floor.
They should have never let him go.
Yeah, seemed like good things were happening. DeLon Wright, you talk about serviceable point guards. DeLon Wright is, in the dictionary under serviceable backup point guard, and this is a good role for him. Now, is Monte Morris a clear-cut starter? I don't know, but this is his shot. Like, Washington's given him that opportunity. He's going to have the keys to the car. Will Barton is a guy I'm not in love with as a starter. I did not like that when Denver kind of was forced into it by injury, and I'm hoping, as you mentioned, that with the young guys that are there, between Kispert, who's hurt, but probably Denny Avdia and Kuzma and Hachimura, I like the interchangeability out of that group. It's kind of what the Blazers did around Damian Lillard for a while, where there was no real small forward or power forward in the traditional sense. It was just two different guys who brought a little bit of something different to the table, but you could just cycle people in and out of those spots and play slightly undersized the four, if you will, but I like it. I that's probably the thing I like most about the Wizards is, and also what scares me is you don't really know who the guys are that hold down those minutes, but you know all of who's in the mix, and it's not a bad mix, right?
No, not at all. And I think probably what I don't like on this team is the unknown of the youth, of which guy is going to step up. But to me,
health, because Avdia and Hachimura can't stay healthy.
Yes, exactly. And I think those are the two guys that you would look at and say, okay, I could see a version of him that becomes a starter, a solid starter, where maybe now you're bumping somebody like a Will Barton down to the bench, where now you're like, oh, Will Barton coming off the bench is a really good piece, as opposed to Will Barton, the small forward that's in the starting lineup. So I think that's the biggest question mark to me, is kind of who can step up and be a third guy, or can they take some of those guys and bundle them together to get somebody else in a trade? I mean, that's always kind of the name of the game for going to get stars. Do other teams like those guys enough to think they could take two or three of them and do something with them?
My biggest question with Washington, the thing I don't like, is while they're serviceable and Brad Beal is an all-star and Porzingis might be an all-star, and I'm totally fine with Porzingis moving full-time to center. That was going to be his destiny in the NBA eventually, and we're at that point now. I don't know who the lead defender is on this team. And usually you want one of your wings to be that guy. And while Brad Beal is an underrated defender, that's not what you want him doing if he's also your top offensive piece. It's not Will Barton. Kuzma, Avdia, Hachimura, maybe Hachimura moves into that, but I don't know. Like, none of those guys really track as defensive specialists. Gafford's pretty decent defensively. Monte Morris and DeLon Wright are pretty decent defensively. But again, there's your 5 and your 1 spots. That's not really how defense works in today's NBA. And I'm just wondering if that is a major oversight that has yet to be rectified, or if they're just going to roll the ball out there and not really care about that end as much this year. Contavious Caldwell-Pope was kind of filling that role previously, and Dinwiddie did a little bit when healthy, but I'm a little bit worried about this team and the high number of points that they're probably going to give up, much like the year that Russell Westbrook was with the Wizards.
Yeah, I mean, that was a team that was going to score a lot and give up a lot. And you're right. It didn't seem like it really particularly mattered as long as they could score a couple more buckets. And to me, coaching is a question mark. They're still maturing as a staff, trying to come together in some of this stuff. And there's bumps along the road that are just associated with that when you bring in a new coach and a new staff like that. So, yeah, they're very middling in the NBA, but I do like the assortment of talent that they're compiling.
And you seem to like them more than Charlotte.
I do at this point.
Right.
Assuming health, which is always a dangerous proposition.
Mm-hmm.
To me, Beal, Porzingis, Kuzma are better than, LaMelo, and then kind of who else for me. I like more guys on Washington than I do for Charlotte.
That's fair. They finished at the bottom of the division, and we have disrespected them for a couple of years here on our preview series where we didn't give them much airtime because there wasn't much to talk about except to name some names and say we like those players, but we have no idea what the plan is. I was not prepared to do that with the Magic this year. I will be honest. I like them a lot more. But after hearing you kind of tease this out, are you seeing a plan in Orlando? Are you seeing like what is maybe kind of sort of supposed to be happening here? And if so, please enlighten me.
Yeah, I think it's the start of something. To me, if you're going to bottom out in the NBA or in any sport for that matter, job number one is compiling assets.
Yeah.
That could be what the Thunder and what the Hornets, rather the Pelicans have done, and get all the draft capital that you can for Orlando. And now we're seeing it with Houston. It's compiling the guys in the draft and building teams out that way. And, we've seen it a little bit. I'm actually really high on Jalen Suggs, even though he didn't, show out as much as maybe I would have liked to see this past year. But you've got Jalen Suggs. Franz Wagner seems to be the real deal.
Mm-hmm.
You still don't know what you have with Jonathan Isaac, who's super intriguing. Mo Bamba is an interesting piece, not as exciting as maybe he was a couple years ago.
You're running out of upside.
Right. Same thing with Wendell Carter Jr., but he also had some nice games coming over from Chicago, something that he wasn't showing as much with the Bulls. And now you had Paolo Banchero, who I think is a guy you can build around. And I haven't even gotten to Cole Anthony yet. Another piece there. These are all decent guys who have room for growth, room for development. And I think you can see, whereas you were talking about Washington, it's all kind of these wing players and they're interchangeable, sure, but we're seeing the Cole Anthony at point or Jalen Suggs at point. We're seeing Banchero. We're seeing Wagner on the wings. We're seeing a big man rotation of Carter Jr., of Bamba. You're seeing Isaac, who could be any number in between there, who's got oodles of potential.
Yeah.
And if you put your glasses on and look hard enough, you can see something going on with Orlando that I think is the start of something good.
I got to pick your brain on this.
In your run.
Most teams, as you get through that rebuild, and when you get to that point of being a contender, you need at least 2 stars. You got your 2 all-stars, and ideally you could fit that third wheel in there, but we've seen that's not necessarily required. It's nice when you have it. Or you can have your 1 super-duper ooper star and a really, really good cast around them. Who are the 2 stars that you see in Orlando, or the 2 guys who have to become that for this iteration to get where they want to go and they think they're going?
Sure. Paolo better be number 1 front and center for their sake. If you're going to take him number 1 over Chet Holmgren, over Jabari Smith Jr., he better be front and center in that rebuild. So I think he's 1 there. I think they think Franz Wagner is number 2.
Really?
And maybe he's the 3rd guy eventually once they get somebody else. I would like to see Jalen Suggs kind of take things over a little bit more in year 2. I think he could be a number 2 guy. But I think between Banchero and Wagner, then you take the rest of the guys and figure out who you can turn into another guy. Again, Orlando's not a sexy free agent attraction. There's no state tax in Orlando. Sure, that works. But it's not Miami. It's not LA. It's not New York. So you've got to build it through the draft like they're doing, and then eventually go out and get a difference maker with the young guys that you're developing. So player development has been good. And Jamal Mosley, from everything I've heard in Orlando and in his time in Dallas, is that guy who can develop young talent. But I don't know what the ceiling is. I don't know how high end this talent could be. Paolo, I like a lot. Wagner is super solid, and I think Suggs can be the same. But you're going to have to mix and match with the other guys to see who else is available. You may be able to have to trade a few of those guys to bring in the other difference maker.
One of the things I consistently saw with the Magic in their previous iteration was looking at certain guys as stars and building blocks. Nick Vucevic is a perfect example of this, who were just really good players, but were not actually what the Magic were going to need to take that step, and that's why they couldn't go any further. I'm with you 100% on it being Banchero for number one, as having to be that star. I am 100% not with you on Wagner, who I like a lot as a player, but I saw a guy last year who came into the league and was NBA ready when a lot of people did not think he was NBA ready.
Sure.
And that might be as much as we get out of him, is that this is a very solid starter. This is a guy who's going to be absolutely a part of your rotation, and his on-off numbers are going to be good. The team's going to be good with him there. But second star, I'm going to be really surprised if that's where he tracks and he's got that much more left. Now I look at Jalen Suggs. I go, maybe. You're right, he struggled a little bit, but the pedigree's there. I think a lot of people looked at Cole Anthony's numbers and like, oh, it's him. He's going to be I see a solid starting NBA point guard with Cole Anthony, who ideally will be a late career, uber valuable backup point guard on some really good, potentially championship teams. I don't see a multi-time all-star there. I see a solid starter out of Wendell Carter Jr., a rotation guy. I'm hoping, for RJ Hampton and Mo Bamba and guys like that, Markelle Fultz, that he can resurrect his career. I'm hoping they can be solid rotation guys. To me, the other one that we've touched on is, and Chuma Okike, I think, can be a rotation guy too.
Yep.
So these are all of those trade pieces you're talking about. Who fits and who do we have to move off? But the other guy is Isaac. And
he's the wild card.
It's the health issues, but if he's healthy, I guess the bigger question becomes, can he and Banchero play together? Do you see that working 2-3 years down the line as they continue to mature into NBA bodies and skill sets? Is that where you go and then hope that, Suggs or player yet to be named is what you got?
Yeah, I mean, Isaac, I think, is the total wild card, but his defense is ahead of his offensive game still. So whereas Isaac has the length to guard 2 through 5 for sure, Paolo, I don't know what you're getting from him on the defensive end. He's the guy who's going to have the ball and is going to be asked to score. Isaac can fill in offensively where he's needed and as his offensive game expands, but the defense from Jonathan Isaac, I think, can be game-changing. I think a lot of people, and I watched him at Florida State. That team, Leonard Hamilton wanted 3 7-footers on the floor at all times. I mean, and it was ridiculous the length they had. But you could see what he could do on the perimeter and down low defensively with the wingspan and the agility. I think those two pieces fit in very well in terms of, I don't think they're trying to do the same thing as each other. I think their games complement each other.
We've talked about this for years with Orlando, so I don't want to hone in on what we don't like, because it's too cliche and too easy for them to just say, well, they're still too young, it's going to be ugly at times, and then health-wise, we need XYZ players to be healthy. So instead, let's go that more positive route. What needs to happen for the Magic to not finish in the cellar, but maybe even show out a little ahead of schedule this year? What needs to happen there?
I don't want to put it all on Isaac's shoulders, but I think getting a decent amount of games from him will help them. And I mean, it's guys taking a next step. I don't know that it's much more complicated than that. These are all young guys trying to figure out not just how to play basketball at the NBA, how to be an adult and how to be mature and how to handle the life of an NBA player. It's a lot going on. And it's not like they've got a bunch of big mentors on that team to help drag them through. They don't have really any old guys. Markelle Fultz is an old guy on that team, and he doesn't.
Gary Harris was the guy. I think it was Gary Harris.
Another guy. Yeah. You're right. I forgot about him. But I mean, they don't have those mentors. They don't have an Andre Iguodala. They don't have a Udonis Haslem or anything close to it. And their coaching staff is fairly new. They're going through this for the first time as well. So it's really just it's just growing up. And I don't mean that like in a maturity level. I just mean they all need to grow together. And I think if they can get the camaraderie and start to gel, there's talent there to show potential for sure. And the guys that grow will stick. The guys that don't grow as much, they'll try to use to figure out something else.
I will say this for Orlando. Prior to Gary Harris getting hurt, not that he was going to be a huge needle mover for them, but would have been helpful and probably a veteran guy that they moved by the deadline. I look at the Magic roster and I legit see 12 to 13 NBA players who will have NBA careers or far better on this roster. And I go, there's actually more depth here than on a lot of other rosters in the league. We just don't know what we have with this depth yet. But I agree with you. They're in a far better spot this year, and maybe it's just getting that draft pick with Banchero, and that sets the arithmetic completely different when you got that number one pick in the house now. But I don't hate it, and I'm intrigued. And they'll be one of those league pass special teams that, like, I think we'd be stupid not to pay some attention to this year. Sure. And check out to see what they're going to be over the next few seasons.
You say I don't hate it, and honestly, I mean this with all seriousness. There are some teams you can't say that about in the NBA.
Absolutely, every year.
I don't hate it. Maybe that's the slogan for the Orlando Magic this year as we move on. I don't hate it at all. Mm-hmm. I think there's some potential there, and it's just they're going to have to go through some growing pains. It's really all it comes down to.
All right. We have looked at each of the individual teams in the Southeast Division. It's time to order things out. I'm going to put you on the spot first. How do you see us finishing 1 through 5 this season?
I live in Atlanta. I don't root for the Atlanta Hawks, but I do live here. And I think the hometown team may have a division title this year. I don't want to second guess or doubt Eric Spoelstra, Jimmy Butler, Pat Riley, any of those guys in Miami. I really like the addition of DeJounte Murray. And I think talent-wise, they've got more talent to overcome maybe a better system in Miami.
All right. Who do you got in second?
I will take the Miami Heat. Maybe a lack of talent as compared to previous years still doesn't change the fact that they've got the right people in the right places in that organization to make sure that they have a productive season for sure.
And if I read the tea leaves, if I read in between the lines as we got to the other team, it sounds like you want the Wizards in third. How comfortable are you with that pick?
Fairly comfortable.
All right.
Fairly comfortable. I think the amount of talent, a little bit of depth there that they've got, Beal and Porzingis is a nice 1-2 punch if they can stay healthy. I think there's too much talent on that team to not finish third in this division.
And are you really actually picking the Orlando Magic to finish fourth?
You know I want
the Charlotte Hornets.
You know I want to, but Charlotte has LaMelo Ball and Orlando does not.
Mm-hmm.
So I will stick with Charlotte in fourth. But next year, I'm putting them on watch. Next year, maybe is Orlando's year to get out of the basement.
All right. My picks here, it's really, really hard because I want to pick Atlanta. I want to put them above Miami. I'm a big fan of what they did. I'm going to take the Heat, but just barely. We're talking like a half game or a single game lead to nail it. I have a hard time betting against that crew, as you said. And I think if there are as many nagging issues as we've alluded to with the Heat, that those get addressed by the trade deadline in some form or fashion. Or, as the Heat always seem to do, there's some guy who comes out of the G League who was a low draft pick, whatever it is, and suddenly has a role and it changes the chemistry there and they roll with that guy. So I'll take Miami barely. I'll take Atlanta in second. This is where it really gets tough for me because third place, I could talk myself into Charlotte, Washington, or even Orlando in that spot.
All right.
I don't think I'd go with the Magic, but I could see if everything went right, they could be that young team who just jumps out on people this year and is way more athletic than people want to give them credit for. Man, I see Washington kind of like I did last year, where Washington jumped out to a really nice start of the season, and then as soon as people started to get hurt, things went sideways. There's too many guys there on that front line for me to be confident that they're all going to stay healthy at the same time. So I'm going to pick Charlotte in third. I don't like it. We'll see what happens with the Bridges situation. It doesn't look good. Again, for the LaMelo Ball aspect of things and the fact that I like Kelly Oubre Jr. I think he's going to have a big year now that he's been there for a full season with them. I'll take Charlotte third. I'll take Washington fourth. I guess I'm essentially picking the division to finish the same way that it did last year in the same order. But at least Atlanta and Miami a lot closer to each other. And there's no way, even though I'm putting Orlando in fifth, there's no way they win only 22 games this year. They might be into the 30s and really giving us something to think about. And Washington's a team that if people get hurt, it changes things a lot and they might look really bad. And we might see a Beal trade at the deadline. I don't know. I doubt that happens, but there's a lot of question marks there. And Charlotte, like you've said, the bottom could fall out. So this is the one division outside of maybe the Pacific, which we're going to get to, but that's for an entirely different reason. The Pacific, it's trying to figure out who in the world is the elite there out of the 4 elite teams and who's going to be top dog. Here in the Southeast, it really is like, who wants to win this division and what happens behind them? So I don't know. This may be the most uncertain of all of them for me, but I don't know. We'll see. How do you feel? Leave us your comments. Like, share, subscribe. Do you agree? Do you disagree? We want to hear from you. We want to know what we got right, what we got wrong, all that good stuff. Matt Dagostino from NBA TV, NBA.com, Turner Sports. Thank you so much for joining me again here on Basketball by Association. I really appreciate it.
Anytime.
We got the Pacific Division coming up here during the next week. That'll be the last one. You can check out all the other ones, as I said before. The Vlade Divac episode is in the books. It's 121. We're out of here. We'll see you next time on Basketball by Association. Thanks, everybody.